Today we'll be painting the Ranunculus flower together. Before we get into the painting, I want to share with you a quote that inspires me, and I hope that it inspires you too. Before I start a painting, I often like to start with an intention, and this helps me to set the right mindset before I begin. So here is the quote. My mistakes and imperfections are part of the natural process of creating, and this allows me to grow as an artist. By the end of this video, you would have discovered how I break down a flower after looking through a reference photo, specifically from the flower color guide. Afterwards, you would also see how I would put layers onto my painting in order for you to see how I bring depth into the artwork. The last thing that you would see is how I would complete the entire painting by putting in elements to make sure that there's balance throughout the composition of the painting. This tutorial should be used as a guide to help you to learn how to paint watercolor flowers loosely. As we paint together, I encourage you to focus more on the process instead of the outcome. Now let's get painting. I'm Jillian, a dreamer of possibilities, a curious curator, and a mother. And now I want to create a space for you to find clarity in the chaos of watercolor. Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to paint together with you from this very book, The Flower Color Guide. And we are going to be looking at this very flower here. And the colors here reflected are yellow together with some peach oranges as well as some reds on the underneath of the petals. We're going to try and capture some of these as well as the shape of the flowers. So I'd like you to come on and paint together with me. So in my setup here, on my left-hand side, I have my paints and my palettes. These are paints from Snyder, as well as my 2 cups of water that I'm placed on my table, my paper towel, and my paint has already been sprayed down with my mister. And spraying down your paints are very important to start because you want to ensure that you have activated your paints before you start. So I'm going to start painting, and usually when I paint from reference, I would start with the outside shape of the flower, and I would think about the direction that I want the flower to be in. And right now I'm putting down a clean wash of water first, using my cat's tongue brush from Silver Black Velvet. It's a 3/4 inch brush, and I'm going to start mixing the color that I like. I'm going to mix some oranges, so I'm putting down my yellow. And what I have here is a Snyder Yellow Bright. I'm also going to get some Snyder Red. And I'm putting them next to each other so that I can mix nuances of this color. And I'm going to start with a very, very light tone because in watercolor, we paint from light to dark. So just to get the shape of the flower, I'm going to put down the color. And it doesn't have to be exact at the moment, but I want to make sure that it showcases the direction of the flower. Here, I've got some of the brush hairs that has come onto the paper. That's fine. It happens especially with new brushes. So I've got this brush is relatively new. So after I've put down the shape of the flower, while it's wet, I'm going to dip in some other colors as well. I want to put in a little bit more yellow, but this yellow is very stark, so I'm just going to add a bit of the Snyder Red to give it a bit of a yellow shade instead. And a reference photo does not have to be exact. You don't have to follow it exactly as it is. It's meant to be a guide, and I love to use reference photos because it acts as a great guide for me to understand the direction of the flowers and how I want it to bloom on my paper. So take your time to mix the colors. If your paper has started to dry, you can always go back in and paint over it with wet again. So now I've got one flower down. I'm going to paint another flower.
And maybe this time I want it to be a lot more yellow in color. So I'm going to pick up darker yellow tones and shades. And I'm just going to go in. And this time I'm using a dry on wet technique where I basically added in the paint on the paper. I'm spreading out the paint and creating the shape of the flower. I noticed that the center is dark, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a blue shade instead. I feel that blue gives a very nice contrast between the stamens, and it's also a complementary color to yellow. So this is going to give you some very nice contrast. So again, it doesn't have to be exact. Just play around with it and give yourself an opportunity to learn about the different ways you can manipulate your brush to create petals. You might be using a different size brush. Maybe you are using a large round brush, which is a very common brush to start with. Or perhaps you are using a flat brush, whatever brush that you are using. The most important thing is that when we are painting flowers, we are literally capturing just a hint of what we want it to be, the shape, rather than its actual petals. We don't have to paint every petal. We just want to capture the essence of it. And when I say capturing the essence of it, what I refer to is that we are capturing certain elements to give the viewer a sense that you are painting a flower. So I'm using quite a fair bit of Snyder yellow, and I'm just going in to create these floral shapes. I've organized my cups of water such that I have dirty water in one cup and clean water in another cup because that's easier for me to always have clean water on hand. So here, say I don't want the paint to continue running out. The best way to troubleshoot is to go in with a clean brush with just clean water. It doesn't have any paint on it. And you can always go in, make sure that it's relatively dry, and push back that very area. So you're controlling where you want the paint to move and flow. This is a great technique for you to manage and control your watercolors on your paper, because the thing about watercolor is that the moment you introduce the element of water, there is that nice bit of allowing the paint to just move and flow where the water goes. However, you also still want to be able to go back in and troubleshoot and figure things out without having to compromise the shapes that you're looking for. Being able to balance between letting go and controlling really takes a lot of practice. So I'm just going back in with darker layers to showcase the diamonds a bit more. This also gives the idea of more depth in your painting. And while I am creating more depth, I'm really going in with indigo without really having much moisture on my brush. I'm using mostly just pigment that is pretty thick. And because the paper is relatively dry, it does not run as much. I want to go in and add some greens, and the greens that would complement the painting are warm greens, specifically because the flowers are of a warm shade. So I'm going in with sap green. However, sap green is very bright by nature, so you can mute it down by adding a complementary color and I'm adding a bit of red, and suddenly I get a bit warmer tone, and I have a bit too much red here. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to get more green to give me back my green shade. So earlier on, I should have really just added a very small bit of red instead of how much red I put in, so that you get to see.
I'm beginning to paint in my stems, and I'm using long brush strokes to slowly pull it down so that I get my stems to look long and tall. At the same time, I'm also painting small buds around, which I see in the reference photo. These tend to be of a lighter color, so I'm using water to dilute my paints so that I get a lighter value. After the painting has dried, I go in and I add in a darker shade of green. This is so that it creates more depth to my stems as well as leaves and buds. Next, I'm starting to layer the flowers as well. So I'm using a darker value of yellow, going around the different flowers, basically painting my shadows. So this part of the layering process can feel very complicated because it is difficult for us to identify which part of the flower we should really layer. And I would encourage you to look at reference photos and identify common themes in flowers, noticing where each flower petal falls and where the shadows typically are. So for me, I noticed that the pattern is such that we always have shadows around edges, and we also have shadows around the middle of the flower. So here is where you want to concentrate on adding in your layers so that it creates more depth and makes your paintings pop. I've started to also put in oranges, and then now I'm gradually moving towards red color. So you really want to start layering with your lighter tones first, the ones with the lightest tint strength. And in this case, yellow has a lighter tint strength as compared to red. So I worked from yellow to orange and then gradually on to red. The thing about layering is that you want to keep things consistent. So if you find that your colors are very vibrant and stark in certain areas, you then want to go around and create that consistency throughout the painting. That way, you get a more cohesive painting and it doesn't confuse the viewer as to why there are certain parts that are a lot darker in saturation as compared to other parts of the painting. So you would see that I'm basically going back to my middles and the leaves and the stems, and I'm basically just adding in my darker values right now. So I started with the lightest value and then I worked on the mid-tones, and right now I'm at the dark value stage. After I looked at my entire composition, I want to create and pull the viewer to look upwards. So I'm putting on another flower that is on the top. And because this flower is in the distance, I'm creating it wet on wet. So I had pre-wet the paper first with clean water, and then I dropped in paint. This is so that the flower looks a lot more diffused. It has very soft edges, and it signifies to the viewer that it's a flower that's hanging out at the back. I'm working using the same process and system where I started with my lightest tone, and then I'm slowly gradually increasing my values and adding darker tones as I move along. We are soon coming to the end of this painting, and while I had fun and I really want to stick around, I hope that throughout this painting you thought about the intention that we started with by allowing whatever mistakes that we make to be part of the natural process so that you will grow in your own creative practice.
Thank you for joining me on this creative journey. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new videos. And if you have got any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. Let's continue to inspire each other and keep creating.